Open up your eyes, it's time you realize now is the time to shine. Baby, you're a ghost, and everybody knows you're counting any toast from your soul. Sugar, you're a star, even with your flaws, you're unstoppable. Oh, can't nobody bring you down when you're high. All you got to do is love yourself. And if you just believe that you're really all you need, you won't need nobody else. We all can come together, make the world much better. Get up on your feet, we're dancing in the street, celebrating liberty. Yeah, we've come this far, but got so far to go. Hold on, baby, don't let go. If you feel alone, just listen to the song. Love yourself, you can't go wrong. Can't nobody bring you down when you're high. All you got to do is love yourself. And if you just believe that you're really all you need, you won't need nobody else. Confidence unstoppable. Self-love is the solution. Be a part of this revolution. Let me hear you say revolution. The category is revolution. Come on, bring it, revolution. Come on, revolution. Revolution. We did a revolution. Can't nobody bring you down when you're hot. All you got to do is love yourself. If you just believe you're the one you need, you don't need nobody Always remember who you are. Don't let anyone get in your way. We need old-fashioned love in the world today.
Resilient little thing, just like mama made you. No one needs to save you. Na 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 na. Wildflower in the spring, no they can't contain you. Through the cracks you break through. Na 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 na. I deserve congratulations, 'cause I came out the other side. I've been having revelations, and I'm gonna let them shine. I deserve congratulations, and never doubt that I survive. If you tell me I won't make it, and that's when I super blue, super in your soul. Don't you ever let it go. Make it burn so bright that they all know I deserve congratulations. Cause I came out the other side. I've been having revelations, and I'm gonna let them shine. I deserve congratulations, and never thought that I'd survive. If you tell me I won't make it, and that's when I super never rained in the desert till I pick me for the very first time. It's darkest before the sunrise. That's when I never rained in the desert till I pick me for the very first time. It's darkest before the sunrise. That's when I super blue, super blue, super blue. I deserve congratulations, 'cause I came out the other side. I've been having revelations, and I'm gonna let them shine. I deserve congratulations, never thought that I'd survive. If you tell me I won't make it, and that's when I super right now, everyone from A to Z. I can cast a spell, secrets you can't tell. Mix a special brew with fire inside of you. Anytime you feel danger or fear, instantly I will appear. Come, I need every moment. It's all in
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I just want to make sure you can hear me. Can I see a thumbs up or a nod? Awesome. I am so thrilled that you are here with us today. Good morning. On behalf of our International Women's Day Planning Committee, I'd like to welcome you. My name is Jill Ashton. I serve as the Regional Administrator for New England at the Women's Bureau within the Department of Labor. And I have served as the co-chair along with my sister co-chair, Ellie Adair, of this planning committee now for, I think we're going on 5 years. It's wonderful to see so many people here virtually. 2 years ago, we had to cancel the event as COVID broke out in Boston and in the United States. And I remember where I was when the planning committee made the difficult decision to forego the event for the safety of our community. Last year, we hosted the event virtually, and honestly, we were just blown away by the participation. What was clear to us was a strong desire for folks to come together in community. Once again, we gather virtually, and once again, I am thrilled that so many have chosen to join us today. Every year on March 8th, we come together to celebrate, uplift, and support efforts to advance gender equity. We are here to celebrate the achievements of women globally and promote further gender and racial parity at home. The celebration of International Women's Day was first observed in the early 1900s to recognize working women. Now it's a day for women, all women. Though it faced backlash and struggle popularity, by 2011, International Women's Day had passed its centenary celebration, and March was declared Women's History Month in the United States. Today, International Women's Day is celebrated in hundreds of countries and highlights women's advancement, while also raising awareness for those still struggling for gender equality. But while the tradition remains strong, it's important to acknowledge that this is not a single solution problem. Feminist policy, gender and racial equity will always have its adversaries, and it's vital to remember that change comes only with hard work and a lifetime of dedication. Our discussion today, unpacking the Shecession, reimagining a new workforce for a new world. The pandemic has impacted women and women of color in disproportionate ways. And yet we have lived and seen remarkable and beautiful perseverance. We know that normal did not serve us well before the pandemic, and in recovery, we are committed to building back better than before. We thank you for joining us in that fight. Now to our program. If, as you hear our panelists remark, you find yourself unclear about something, or if you want to ask a question of the panelists, please type that into the Q&A function. In addition, we encourage you to use the chat for community conversation and exchange. And we have a few members of our planning committee that will be moderating and prompting questions in the chat. The virtual forum is different than how we have gathered traditionally. And we really struggle and want to ensure that our attendees have the opportunity to connect and engage with each other. So please do use the chat, raise up things that you think are interesting, look for the opportunities to connect with other people. It's important to us, and we hope that it's important to you as well. Now, I'm delighted to introduce Simmons University President Wooten. For the last 20 years, Simmons University has hosted, for more than 20 years, Simmons University has hosted the Greater Boston International Women's Day celebration. Many of you will remember being at the Linda K. Parsky Conference Center, sitting at tables decorated with bread and roses to commemorate the 1912 Lawrence textile strike, where women workers fought for fair wages and dignified conditions. We hope to once again gather there in the future. In the meantime, thank you for joining us virtually, and thank you to our longtime partners at Simmons University. Lynn Perry Wooten is a seasoned academic and expert on organizational development and transformation. She became the 9th president of Simmons University on July 1st, 2020, and she is the first African-American to lead the university. Specializing in crisis leadership, diversity and inclusion, and positive leadership, organizational behavior that reveals and nurtures the highest level of human potential, Dr. Wooten is an innovative leader and prolific author and presenter whose research has informed her work in the classroom and as an administrator. Her full bio is included in our virtual program, as are all the other speakers here today. I encourage you to take a look at it. It's my pleasure now to hand the program over to President Wooten.
Good morning and welcome to the Greater Boston celebration of International Women's Day. I think it's so fitting that Simmons has been a host for more than 2 decades. When you think about Simmons being the only women-centered college in Boston and our founding, it is who we are. Simmons University was founded in 1899 by a bequest from John Simmons. And I like to say that John Simmons was an ally and he was a Renaissance man. He had a vision that we would start a university to empower women, that is for economic equity and to do meaningful work. We are also approaching celebrating our 125th anniversary soon, but we're still asking the questions. We're still doing the work that John Simmons envisioned. And today, March 8, 2022, gives us a pause. It gives us the pause to celebrate the history of women and where the movement has gone, to honor our culture, to think about what we are confronting in present day, and to think about the future that we want to chart forward. Let's go back for a second and think about the last in-person breakfast that we had, when we really didn't know that a pandemic was coming. The pandemic hit all of us, and we had to start to think about what does it mean to be in a Shecession? And what I like to say, what does it mean to be in a She recovery? And today, our panelists, along with our moderator, will give us the chance to ask those tough questions, to have a generative dialogue. And as we prepare for the panel, and we also think about what we do at Simmons, the questions that I have for each of us is, what role can education play at the undergrad and the graduate level, and even beyond that, as we think about a life course approach, such as what we do in our conference? How do we ensure wage equity? How do we chart a new way that we live, learn, and lead? Sadly to say, I've been studying what it means to be a woman-friendly organization for more than a quarter of a century. Yet the Shecession has showed us that women are still joining the majority of caring responsibility, and they're leaving the workforce in record numbers. So not only do we need individual empowerment, we need teams to step up for women. We need organizations to make sure their policies are friendly for women, and we need systems change, especially as it relates to equity and caring responsibilities for young people and the elderly. So I am excited about this day, and I'm glad that you're joining us. And now I want to introduce our moderator, Karen Holmwards. Karen Holmwards is the Director of Public Affairs and Community Service, as well as the host and executive producer of Cityline, WCVB's award-winning weekly magazine program. This program addresses the accomplishments, concerns, and issues facing people of color in Boston and its suburbs. She has hosted notable Oscar winner Regina King, Lupita Nyong'o, Forrest Whitaker, Octavia Spencer, Denzel Washington, Louis Gossett Jr., and Barry Jenkins, and Spike Lee, just to name a few. Cityline has been the recipient of Associated Press Massachusetts Rhode Island Best Public Affairs Program and numerous nominations. In addition, Karen also oversees WCVB's public service and community outreach efforts, including the station's work on 5 fixer-uppers, renewing and refurbishing common spaces for areas nonprofits and extreme makeovers. She is a graduate of Boston University School of Public Communication, and she has received the Honorary Doctor of Humane Letters and Communications from Boston University, Cambridge College, and Merrimack College. In addition to her work, she is very involved in the community and advancing the topics that we will talk about on our panel today. She has been involved with the Girls Club Big Sisters of Greater Boston, the Urban League, the National Council of Negro Women, and Mass Vote. And you're probably wondering how Karen has time to do this, and she has mentored a dozen of young women and nonprofit groups over the years. So she is definitely a Renaissance woman, and she exemplifies the conversation today in the spirit of International Women's Day. Karen, welcome.
Dr. Wooten, thank you so much. It's an honor for me to be on the program this afternoon with you and the other great speakers that we have lined up as we celebrate International Women's Day. And it's an honor to work with Jill and Elliot again on one of these programs. They're all so very important in terms of bringing information to our audience. Thank you, Dr. Wooten. I'm going to ask all of our speakers to come on camera as we begin our program this afternoon. First, I'm going to ask Dr. Natalicia Tracy to begin with some opening comments as we consider the topic for this afternoon, unpacking the Shecession. And we'll hear from our other panelists after Dr. Tracy's opening statement. Dr. Tracy.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the Women's Bureau for organizing this event. And I also would like to thank the Simmons University for supporting such an important event as this one for more than 24 years. Of course, thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be part of this panel on International Women's Day. This month, March 22nd, March 2022, marks 2 years since the first saw a nation in region beginning its shutdown to defend against COVID-19 pandemic. In the workforce, industries disproportionately employing women and people of color, such as the food services, healthcare, education, and hospitality, were impacted the hardest with high unemployment And as you know, for those who did continue work in these sectors, these essential jobs require them to physically show up to work. From preschool to college, students sent home and consigned to continue their education, if could, online. As we move to a world operating remotely, the harsh reality of inequality was unveiled even more starkly, with so many racial and class disparities in plain view, especially in mobility and mortality from COVID. Women left the labor market in droves. And according to the National Women's Law Center, by September 2020, about 865,000 women left the labor force. That is 4 times the numbers of men. By the end of 2021, over 3 million women had left their jobs. There were many different reasons why women of all ages, colors, and classes were no longer participants in the paid labor force. Those that could responded to difficult job conditions by retiring. For others, accumulated burnt out. And many were laid off when the companies were forced to close their business and offices. It is well documented that many women left because of the need for them to provide care to their children and loved ones. The second shift became much longer. The National Bureau for Economic Research in 2020 pointed out that mothers took responsibility for a much larger share of childcare than fathers, even before the crisis. In part, this is because there are many more single moms than single dads. The Pew Institute has pointed out that in 40% of America's working families with children, it is the mother who is the primary or solo breadwinner. And of course, in this percentage is so much larger for families of color, including the families of more than 50% of Black children and 27% of Latinx children. But even among married parents who both work full-time, women spend more than 40% more time on childcare than men. As the National Bureau of Economic Research conclude, unfortunately, the pandemic set women's advancement back by years and has drastically impacted especially women of color. With these losses of seniority, positions, experience, most observers have concluded also that we are probably going to see a widening of the gender-based wage gap as economy moves towards recovery. Our failure thus far to offer more public support for high-quality childcare, universal pre-K, and the political installment in Congress over passage of Build Back Better Act only added even more stress to many working families. It certainly seems that we are where we need to be honoring women, the value to the economy and concern. The challenges of ongoing history do not let us rest for very long, does it? We are fortunate to have today distinguished and knowledgeable panel with us to address all these many overlapping policy issues that our turbulent era has presented for families, women workers, and mothers. One of these countries don't have paid family leave, childcare vouchers, and family allowance. So with that, I'll conclude by saying thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel.
Dr. Alicia, thank you very much for that presentation. There's a lot to unpack there. I'd like to encourage everyone who is joining us today to make sure you read the background bios of all of the panelists that we have here today. It's a very well-informed and group quite appropriate for our topic today. And I'm going to ask our panelists to respond to what some of the information that Dr. Tracy has just presented. And Monique, are you there? There you are.
I am here.
Hi, Monique.
Hi.
What did you think about some of the information that Natalia just presented?
Nathalisa had a great framing for, Nathalisa had a great framing, and nice to see you again, Nathalisa, for what we're facing today as a society. And a lot of times when people think about working mothers, oftentimes working mothers that are overseen or invisible are working mothers in low wage industries that who already are already pressed against the wall for all their, because they're suppressed wages, but also poor working conditions. But they are also mothers and parents and oftentimes caring for other people's families. So whenever I'm thinking about getting universal childcare, I want to think through comprehensively also getting care for people who care for others. So I just want to start with that. I think that's a great opening for me. And I'm thinking just for me, and there's such a big eye-opening moment for mothers across all class levels and also wage industries and work industries to see each other in solidarity across industries. So I think this is a big opening for us in society that was afforded to us because of COVID, sadly, but it's also a big opening and opportunity for us to organize and come back better as a women's force for families.
Monique, maybe you could tell us a little bit about how your role as executive director at the Matahari Women Workers Center intersects with the data and the conversation that we're having today.
I like to start with the worker themselves as women workers. Oftentimes, women are already in low wage industries are already pressed for having low wages. One campaign that we're working on is eliminating the sub-minimum wage in the state of Massachusetts for tip workers, who are often women of color working in restaurants, industries, and gig work industries. But they are also people who need childcare, and for me, that's the intersection that they are people who are needing overdue raised wages, eliminating the minimum wage to get minimum wage just like everybody else, regardless of what industry you work in, and also getting your rights to access rights that you don't think that you have at this moment. I think Nathlesia is really familiar too with the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights that was passed. It's one thing to pass a bill and raise wages and working conditions, but implementation of it is another thing that communities still have to shoulder. One of our campaigns in Matahari is Our Work, Our Worth, to ensure that domestic workers and other workers have a platform to go against and file against violations against the domestic workers law.
Thank you. Deanna, I'm going to turn to you. I'd like your feedback on Natalicia's opening information, and if you could talk a little bit about your how your professional perspective intersects with our topic today.
Thank you, Karen. So, I really do empathize with all women, and I'd like, one of my first comments to be us being mindful of the women who do not have the privilege to leave work. And as we've gone through the pandemic, I personally was working on the front line responding for the city of Boston in terms of public health. And there were so many women who didn't have the privilege of leaving work. And that didn't apply or imply that they were happy, fulfilled with their work conditions. And some of us, or for the big percentage of women, had the privilege of saying, I've had enough. I'm prioritizing my family, I'm prioritizing my safety and my children. But there are those who increasingly and have continued to show up to work because they need to support themselves and their families. And some of these women actually are also working as caretakers. So I'd like for us to sort of reflect and think about how we can best support them. And of course, seize the moment and realize that yes, COVID was unfortunate, is still unfortunate, but it has given us the power as women. It has given us the power as employees to advocate for ourselves and have some policies across the board that are workable and mutual for all parties involved when it comes to work and childcare. In my profession as a nurse practitioner, I know many of my colleagues have, out of either burnout or for reasons related to childcare, have decided to either find jobs that are very supportive of their goals and their life outside work, or have decided to pause in their clinical careers and say, I will return when I feel less overwhelmed. And there are some who have continued to work, particularly the group of, let's say, nursing assistants, medical assistants, who don't come from backgrounds of wealth and being self-sustained. And what that means is, doesn't necessarily mean they're happy, doesn't necessarily mean they're fulfilled, but it's a choice between, do I show up and expose myself at work every single day, or do I continue to stay home? And most of these individuals are women of color. And as we all know, in this profession, especially nursing assistants and medical assistants, the biggest percentage is women, the biggest percentage is immigrants, and the biggest percentage is of those who don't have the privilege to not go to work. What I'd like to, continue thinking about in terms of our topic today is the different ways in which we can increasingly support women in clinical practice. We have situations like where in 2020, women are still expressing or pumping from exam rooms in some practices, or situations where, we sometimes we get lucky and get bonuses at work depending on the number of patients you see. And there's some women who don't qualify to get this bonus because they've had a child and they're expressing milk and they don't make the hours just like their colleagues are making. And so they're penalized for actually being women and having a child and taking time out of their schedule to pump. I think COVID has highlighted so many cracks in our healthcare system. And I'd like for us to broaden this conversation, sort of thinking about what do we want to see and what's ideal, especially for women in the healthcare system.
Go and now and going forward.
Yes.
Jade Rodriguez, how are you today? You're the Center Director on Operating Council of Horizons for Homeless Children, and you bring a different perspective to this conversation. Jay,
Absolutely.
what's on your mind?
Thank you, Karen. That resonates a lot for me, being the frontline essential worker. We were quarantined for 3 months, but soon thereafter, we were directly working with families again. And it really put into perspective the importance that we play as educators in the field of early education, and the respect that I was hoping to receive after really seeing what happened during COVID is still yet to be seen in terms of how what comprises mostly of women in the field being respected as a professional. That is still something that we're still struggling to really maintain and have others acknowledge us. Mental health is a big issue in terms of, returning back on site on doing the direct work when you're wondering yourself as a woman, as a parent, who's going to care for your child. So that resonates tremendously with me and the staff that I work with on day-to-day basis. And going back on site, it was really considering the people that are at the front line and are doing the work. And then also considering their families. And, you talk about compassion fatigue. That is, you want to be there for the families. A lot of us that are in the field, before I was a director, I've always been an educator. So for me, it's about the mission, the passion, building these creative minds, working in a 2-generational model, understanding that the child doesn't come alone. You're given so much of yourself, but yet there's a downside to all of that too, because you're not actually being seen to your full person. You're not getting compensated to be that essential worker. Some of us, or some of the teachers, are getting $14 an hour with a bachelor's degree. Like, how do you justify that? How do you justify putting all of that on the front line? And a lot of the women who are in the workforce are parents of children 5 and under. Having accessibility, affordable accessibility to childcare is also an issue for us. So there's a lot that we need to unpack and try to understand and to improve. We need to invest on these major points that can really, I feel like we've been having this conversation for a long time, right? So my hopes is that COVID would have shed some light on how to move forward and to really put emphasis on the importance of early educators, early childhood educators in the field, because we are the pioneers for the future. And it sounds a little bit extreme, but we are teachers who are teaching our future generation. So we definitely have to really invest in the workforce, invest in the field. So I'm excited to talk about my personal experience in the field and how we can really elevate the folks that are doing the work.
And Jade, I'd like to stay with you for a moment and ask each of our panelists if you have any personal reflections going through the pandemic. We all had to survive through the pandemic. But if you could share some of your personal reflections and more about how you felt as you experienced the pandemic and as you were looking around and seeing your colleagues and friends and family deal with the impact.
It was definitely a tumultuous time, not understanding what's coming next. We definitely, in our program, we ensured that all folks stayed employed. We didn't furlough any person, but our go-to was really trying to be innovative, trying to understand what the family needs were. And here we go again, it's always about like our service to others. And so during that time, the 3 months that we were in quarantine, it was really about ensuring that our families have what they need. So like access to food, access to resource, because many of them were unemployed at some point. So it was very, very stressful. I myself personally, having been a teacher for 20 plus years in early education, somehow I avoided burnout, being burnt out. But during this 3 months, I felt like I was the most stressed because I didn't know what to expect. And for the work that we do with our kiddos, it's hands-on. You know, you want to be curious, you want to explore. And so virtual anything with 0 to 5 kiddos is, as you guys probably know, being parents and having to multitask. A lot of our staff members, even while we remained virtual, it was still hard to juggle being a mother, being a teacher all at once. And hence the reason why I said, like, after the COVID situation, we're still in it, but we're not really in the thick of it right now, right? But I was hoping that, you know, the lens was cleared to see like the value that we bring into the workforce, because women are needed to work. Like, we're not in a place, it's not setting us up for success where we can just leisurely choose to stay at home with our kiddos, which I think most of us would want to do that, but it's not really realistic. The economics doesn't set it up in a way that we can just choose to make that decision, especially people of color. I myself, being an immigrant, my parents had to work to, I came from a 2-parent household, but it was not until high school when I started to write an essay for college that I recognized that my parents weren't really seeing each other except for on Sunday, because my mom would stay at home in the daytime and my dad would work the morning shift. So it was not until then that I was like, oh, Mom, Dad, when did you guys see each other? Because sometimes my dad had to take on overtime for Saturday just to make ends meet. Luckily, I did have the protective factors, but you know, we don't always have those luxuries to decide to stay home full time.
The pandemic is subsiding, but I think for all of us, the residual effects are still there and will be there for some time. Monique, as you looked around at colleagues, family, and friends, what did you observe? What were you feeling? What were you experiencing?
So during a moment of like that, a lot of times we go through like I would say trauma responses, and it reminds me a lot of a time whenever you are fear of like you want to be close to your family. And my parents are elderly and they live in Canada, and it reminded me of our distance. I haven't seen them in 2 years, and I was actually longing for all the lost time that we didn't have as a family because they worked so much as refugees who held down multiple jobs. And I think about that and think about our membership and so many women of color and people of color who are facing that now, all the lost time that we don't have with our families. So that was my most immediate reaction, and something that I still hold till this day because I now haven't seen my parents. And for an organization, as we were learning the data about the people who were disproportionately impacted by COVID were people of color, and on top of that, women who had to go do work at high-risk industries, which interface with children, with clients in restaurants, customers. And you are always in this constant wondering as you hold down the base of your organization, when is the next shoe going to drop? What's going to come next, you know, as a tidal wave that's impacting our membership? And we did our best to really make sure that our community felt intact and supported during this time, but it was really difficult, especially all of our membership are working in varying forms of low-wage industries that are under attack, simultaneously upheld as essential workers one day, but next day forgotten and not giving fair wages, and also tips are down for restaurant workers. So that was a hard reality to see, even in a moment of COVID, which was really a pivotal moment for our society. We also had a short-term memory, you know, and speaks to me what Jade was saying. Is like, you would think a moment like this would break us open, but here we are trying to fight back the short-term memory, and how do we move forward with and capture what we notice, but actually build from that. So I'm holding that right now, and I just want to resonate with Jade and all the work that women of color and across all industries, is that we do the work that makes all other work possible, and that's borrowed from the domestic workers' rights movement. Domestic workers do invisible work that makes other work possible. It makes it possible for other people to go to work. So it reminds me, even till this day, of all workers across all industries.
Mm-hmm. Deanna, as you were living or surviving, thriving through the pandemic, were there any moments that crystallized for you the experience that others might have been having? Was there a moment, an aha moment for you that caught your attention?
Karen, I think I would share from my experience, and my aha moment was being a student and a mom. Right at the outbreak of the pandemic, I was at Simmons. Good to see you, President Wooten. I was finishing my nurse practitioner program, and I was a non-traditional student as well. I went to school with children and a marriage, and of course work. And as the pandemic broke out, things transitioned from being in the classroom to remote. Similarly, daycares and schools were closed. And as a first generation immigrant in this country, I didn't have family or friends who would come over and say, you know what, I'm going to watch your kids for the next half hour while you attend class. And so for me, it was this balance of sitting on my desk, having my classes remotely, and being a mom and caretaking for my kids, and also work as a nurse during the same pandemic. And it really did resonate with me so much in terms of the available support there was for women to balance of roles, but also that intersection of women who are non-traditional, who are just establishing themselves and not having family and not having that support they need to uplift themselves, and how they end up staying at the same level because they lack the support. And it really aligns with what Monique and Jade just talked about, their parents, how they had to work and not see each other to balance up things. And as I moved on working on with COVID response, I started out working with partners in health, and I was reaching out to people in the entire state. And what spoke out to me was speaking to families of either undocumented individuals or families from marginalized populations who did not have the ability to isolate in their own households. Because I would call them and say, hey, you have COVID, this is what we're going to do. And they'll be like, okay, we have a 1-bedroom apartment. And I have my mom, my grandma, and my children in the house. So there's no way we're going to isolate. And so that really highlighted how much systemically we had to do to balance the equation, both for women, but also for the population at large. And as I went through the pandemic, I then realized how burnout is real, because it was very clear that I had to complete school, I had to work, and I had children, and all of this being balanced by just me and then the support of my spouse were complicated, were complex. And so in the moment, I looked at what are the resources available for women of color trying to establish themselves, and they're very limited. And so that got me thinking about what do we do to elevate women, and what do we do to give them the resources they need so they could better be positioned to care for themselves, their families, and don't burn out.
Mhm.
And the other thing the other thing I'd like to highlight was how much that whole process for me, the aha moment over the summer, that moment of, how issues around systemic racism were highlighted, and how issues surrounding women and their positions in organizations, and how unfairly things are, but particularly for those of color, were increasingly highlighted. And then the movement that came out of it was very reassuring and gave me some hope.
Thank you, Diana. Natalicia, you're with us, I hope. I would like to ask you that same question. Your opening presentation was filled with academic research, but was there a personal moment for you that you experienced during the pandemic that crystallized and highlighted the importance of the work that we're talking about today?
Yeah, so during the pandemic, I had the opportunity to also support a lot of families, right? When all the business closed down and universities, the community had to extend the hours to support for families who no longer had jobs. This was a time that we really sort of had to think about our mortality, right? How vulnerable we were, but also how much we depended on one another for our own well-being, right? So that was something that I was constantly thinking about. And another piece of it for me was the fact that it was the vulnerability of families, but also the humbleness of them being patient and resilient that I experienced. And that gave me a lot of energy during the time. As you know, I'm new in my new position. I was a executive director in a nonprofit in Boston for over a decade. And it's very easy for us to feel what other people are feeling, where we understand where they're coming from, right? But I also, one thing that I really appreciated, it was the support that came from everywhere, right? It was great opportunities to build community, to build strength, and to, weather the storm together, right? So, and I think for me, what came out of that experience for me is the most important piece of it is the fact that we, at the end of the day, people, women, families, specifically women of color, who are constantly being challenged, right, and pushed to the highest possible limit. It's the strength and commitment to themselves, but also to their community, because at the most difficult time, really, that's when we found the most support and loving and caring in spite of, COVID-19 pandemic, right? So for me, that's the biggest piece is the outpouring of love that came out of that very difficult situation.
Thank you for sharing that. Now, Talicia, I'm going to go to a question that's popped up from our virtual audience. They'd like to know, what advice can you offer to address some of the issues we've been speaking about so far today and getting women back into the workforce?
So as you know, I've been long for years advocating for women's rights, workers' rights, immigrants' rights. And I believe in policies as the foundation, bedrock, to create opportunity for everyone. And right now, a lot of my work involves working to level the playing field, right? To create opportunities, equal opportunities for everyone, to ensure that people are safe at the workplace, to ensure that we fight against discriminatory practices at the workplace. And I think what we need to do the most right now is ensure that we can continue to have forums like this one, right? To talk about issues that are impacting women, families, working people in America. It is important that we don't shy away from battles of conversations and engagements with policymakers, with our neighbors, right? This is about involving everyone. This is about an opportunity for us to continue the fight because it's far from being done. And I would say that the most important number one thing that we can do to continue to battle unemployment, continue to battle wage gap, gender and racial discrimination at the workplace is to continue to use our voices and continue to advocate for better conditions. And of course, policy must work on policies that are broad and inclusive and will support all working women and people, but especially pay special attention to women of color and Latinx families.
I'd like to ask the rest of you, what else could employers be doing to better support women and caregivers in particular? Does anyone have any out of the box thoughts, suggestions? Jade?
Yes, this really is close to what I love doing as an administrator, is really supporting my staff. It's always the little things. Like, of course, we need policies. I totally agree with that. But it's the little things that you do to make one feel seen and heard in your environment. So in our program, we really try to help each person feel like they belong. So our environment reflects a lot of that cultural responsiveness that is needed to make you feel like you belong somewhere.
Give us an example. Give us an example of what you've been doing for your team.
So I definitely try to, this is going to sound silly, but as a teacher, I always made sure that when I walk into a classroom, I'm making an intentional connection with each child. So it may be, like a brief moment of seeing a child and acknowledging the positive that they're doing or something of that nature. So I tend to actually bring that to my staff as well. So recalling an information that they might have given me before about their personal life, and being a leader that's not concentrated on like, you need to respect me, I'm the boss, and so on and so forth. Really being human, having that human to human interaction is so important. And especially like during COVID times, we were so isolated. And so when we were able to come back onto our program, it's so imperative for me to ensure that I'm being seen and that they're being seen, that we're feeling like we belong somewhere, we have same mission. So although a livable wage is definitely an investment that is necessary, it's not the exclusion to really providing a supportive environment. A sense of belonging is so important in all aspects, and having voices being heard. So always coming from a lens of, this is how we're doing, like being reflective is so key too, because the way that we're doing things might not always be the best way to do things. So it's good to have a collective voice, even if the consensus is not to agree on something immediately, but eventually you'll come to a conclusion where it's beneficial to the people that are part of the organization, that people aren't isolated in their own silos, that it's a collaborative effort. So for me, that's like my pride and joy, to really see people for who they are, especially considering my own intersectionality. You know, I'm a person who identify as queer, someone who's an immigrant, first generation, a person of color, a person who's non-binary in terms of gender. So for me, when I walk into a space, I want to be seen for the full person that I am. And so I love to ensure that whomever is coming to our organization can have that full ability to be their full self. For me, I'm not saying it's always cut and dry, because I'm still having all these intersectionality. I'm still trying to find my voice and my sense of being on how to, I guess, the behavior, you know, we're familiar with code switch. So I'm really trying to hone in who I am and express who I am in all levels of different platforms. So the same journey that I'm going through, I want to be able to lend that for other women and have their voices be heard, and for them to be their full authentic self.
You know, my dad used to always say, money is not the greatest satisfier. In other words, you could have a wonderful wage or a wonderful salary, but still be miserable at your job. And I'm not suggesting that people shouldn't be paid adequately, just reinforcing the point that money is not the only thing that makes your employment enjoyable, palatable, or a place you want to go to every day.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Deanna, I think you wanted to say something.
Sure. So tell you what, my friends, I think I really would like to see a work environment, or, you know, this is from the perspective of an employee who is also a mom and a wife. I'd like to see employers understanding and acknowledging that work is supposed to better one's life, not the other way around, and that working moms should not be treated as outliers in work environments. And then I want my employers to consider women, their other identities, for example, marital status, race, culture, and immigration status, and support them based on that. And obviously, as a clinician, I think I would appreciate seeing childcare on site in workplaces, because tell you what, you're asking me or other colleagues to leave home, come to work and take care of someone else. How about you had a childcare space at work for infants, and women would come in, especially the young ones, drop their child, feel comfortable while working, that their child is down the hall, take a break at lunch, go nurse, come back and work. And this is what it gives the employer. It's a win-win. Mom is happy. Mom is not worried about the baby during the work day. And she's very, productive at work. Patients are happy, or, whatever business it is, everyone is happy, and it's a win-win. And then there's some things that should be incorporated into routines, like pumping breaks. No one should frown upon that. I mean, we are in 2022, right? And so if a woman has a child, you're already hiring someone who is of childbearing age. So it's very normal that at some point in their lifetime, if they choose to have children, they will. And so work with them, and depending on where they're at in life. And at the very least, understand the roles of women and their responsibilities outside work. For instance, some of the choices women make to either leave their family or their loved ones and come to work, they may not have children. They may be just, other things in their life that they value, but they leave time away from them and come to put in work for many reasons. I think post the pandemic, I'd like to continue seeing hybrid work environments, because tell you what, companies have invested in these things. Systems have been put in place to see employees work through the pandemic. Why not continue doing it after that? because they're already being productive. For some of them, it works best, and it's a win-win.
But you know, Deanna, some companies operate on if I don't see you, then I don't think you are working.
I
And
think that, sorry, to cut you short, Karen.
they don't embrace the hybrid model. What do you say to those companies who think that, you know, the boss has to walk down the hall and see you at your desk in your cubby in your workspace?
I think that time has long gone. I think if employers expected their employees to be productive during the pandemic and they were comfortable with them working from home and let them work from home, then why that change? I think if you are hiring a human being responsible enough to come to your organization and say, I'm going to work here and build my career here, you should be trusting enough to you should be trusting enough and trust them to be productive no matter where they are. And in some instances, if you have a good goal and an objective that all your employees are united and working towards, you should be able to trust them. And if you're treating them well, obviously if they're not from work, they're doing whatever they can towards that one mutual goal for the organization.
Mhm.
And I also would like to also think in terms of flexibility with at work. I think there has to be various forms of flexibility with work hours, considering either school systems or creating opportunities for employees to be part of their children's life events that matter in life. And then I'd like to see some form of investment in education around women's issues, and those centered around bias, and some things that women face, particularly those of color in a workplace. And that way it's a collaborative, and that way it's a united force. You educate everyone, everyone understands, everyone works together towards solving or changing some of these issues that women face on a daily basis.
I see a comment in the chat says, don't take men off the hook either. Employers should have leave policies and grace in general for parents. My husband picks up our kid from school and gets a mix of the stinky eye, and he's such a good dad. And he gets the stinky eye from his employer. So I guess we don't want to leave the dads out of the opportunity to have a better workplace either. Monique, do you have any suggestions for ways that employers can post the pandemic make the workplace better for women and caregivers?
I think I like where we're going on this panel surrounding what people can do now. A lot of times, workers and then employers and anyone that employs anyone forgets the power and responsibility that you hold in creating a good environment for people to work in. And organizational change is such a powerful force, especially in roles that you may hold in your workplace. And for me, policy change is a bedrock, and I agree with Natalicia. And sometimes it just takes too long, but there's things that we can do now, right, for each other, like what Jade was saying and what Diana was saying about workplaces, workplace environments. I'm going to speak to you about my staff, for example. This is a critical time for employers to also listen to their team members. One of the key things that we did under the pandemic, as of recently, was create a governing body for the staff outside of me to uplift things that they need as workers to be supported in the workplace. So they were requesting higher wages. We reviewed our benefits together, and we're negotiating right now to create a healthy work environment for all of us, because I want them to stay and I want them to develop as leaders so they can develop the organization and hold down the community that we are bestowed and chosen to support. So for us, for me, I had to step into my leadership. And like, this sounds scary, but it's also new, but it's also an opening. And I'm excited to see what comes of it. So from that, we even raised the floor of our basic, our wage compensation scale. And that was voted upon a democratic process. And it helps bolster empowerment. And also it models what we hold down for our community every day. We're building governance structures and also advocating for people to engage in democracy. What about in the workplaces that we are working in right now? So I'm really proud of the stuff that's happening inside Matahari, and I'm hoping that other workplaces can do the same for your environments. And I want to hear, and I also want to uplift that I think I saw somewhere in the chat, what policies can we fight for in Massachusetts? Yeah, there's a lot of great things that are happening right now that can support working families. There's driver's license bill. There's also the one fair wage bill to eliminate this tip minimum wage. There's also a coalition to build universal childcare solutions that don't exploit workers. Care That Works coalition that's led by Community Labor United brings together organizations that want a future for universal childcare in Massachusetts, but not off the back and expense of childcare workers. Because oftentimes we're learning that through the childcare voucher system and also under domestic work, people who do childcare are exploited, and whatever solution we have in the future can't be off the back of workers. So there's lots of ways that you can support workers now, and also ways that you can do it right now in your power as a worker and also as an employer.
We've talked about hybrid, acknowledging or incorporating hybrid work conditions and trying to be more flexible with hours and other suggestions to make work life better. But there are some essential workers, healthcare workers that don't have that flexibility. They have to be, they just have to be there. There's no option for flexibility. How do we make their situations better? And what can employers do to address the burnout that we saw during the pandemic, specifically among our healthcare workers? Anyone want to take that?
I'll take it. I'll give it a try.
I know it's a lot.
Yeah. So I'm coming from a background and a career where I'm a primary care provider, and so at some point I can do some work remotely. But I also do understand my colleagues, the nurses, who cannot, for the most part, their roles are on site, and so you have to be there all the time. And I think we need to change and have scheduling management in a sense that you schedule your employees, allowing them the space to breathe, the space to fill their cup, because as we've all known, no one can pour from an empty cup. And so if you're structuring their schedules, don't schedule them like crazily, like you're in for 12 hours unless they choose to, or don't schedule them back to back or rotate them around, and just don't make them have the same routine every single week. And I think that helps a lot. And obviously team building activities. Now, what some organizations in healthcare are doing, they would say, oh, this weekend we're going to connect. Do you want to come and we have coffee? That doesn't count to team building being done by an organization. These should be activities arranged by the organization on an employee's paid time, right? For the employee to understand that my organization values my presence, my contribution to its goal, and they are structuring this on a Monday when I'm supposed to be seeing patients. But instead, no, we're going to go do such activities to take care of ourselves, or to better understand each other as colleagues, or to share what's going on. I mean, there's some work environments in healthcare where the only time employees will talk to each other is via text of their work time, because of the nature of the work. And so you're in it, you feel left out by yourself, you'll see your colleague giving them a patient report, but that doesn't mean that you're having the collegial support that could be useful for parties involved. So organizations having team building activities, win-win for them, employees are happy, burnout is on the down low. And I think also, they should figure out how to prioritize the well-being of their staff. And because as we've seen, currently, they're leaving, they're exhausted, they're burned out from COVID. And so how do you, if it's behavioral health, have a behavioral health, therapist or team that is not serving only the patients, but is also serving your staff, because they're the ones on the front doing all these things. That's just an example of other things they should do to prioritize the well-being of their staff, in my opinion. Yeah.
I think that the conversation around mental health has become more frequent and more open since the pandemic. Many more people are talking about the need for behavioral health and mental health support. Um, is this obviously is something positive. Where do we see that conversation going?
I I think this conversation has only started, and most employers are waking up to it, that it's happening. And what I'd like to see around this is people not being penalized or looked at as outliers because they are struggling with mental health, but rather be supported on the job. And that someone I just saw in the chat coming in a comment about stigma. It's happening in the workplace. So I think we would want to start at educating all the employees and the parties involved in an organization about mental health and what it means to have employees who are struggling with it. That way we can deal with the stigma upfront, and then set up a structure of mental health support for employees on site or off site or wherever, that is confidential, that it's not going to run back to the employee's record in the long run. That way people or employees are confident and feel comfortable seeking this support, but also it's supporting them towards becoming better workers and obviously working towards the goal of the organization.
I think there's a bill winding its way through Beacon Hill, sponsored by State Senator Julian Sear and State Senator Karen Spilka, that will address in Massachusetts making behavioral health, mental health access in managed care just as available as your primary care, routine checkups are right now. And I think the bill is pretty complex, but hopefully in another 2 or 3 years, we'll see mental health elevated here in Massachusetts to a point where everyone has more access to that kind of treatment. So let me see here. Jade, were you going to make a comment about that? Yes.
Yes, I wanted to talk about recruitment and retention in the early education sector, because I'm hearing, and it's definitely critical for families to have subsidized childcare for 0 to 5. As we all know, the studies have supported the fact that children are learning the most during those age group. For me, I feel like oftentimes, Monique, you were mentioning how the essential childcare workers are at the forefront. And sometimes, often enough, it's kind of like one thing doesn't come alone. So childcare workers, educators, sometimes they're just thrown in to meet the ratio of the classroom. So they're just kind of thrown in the classroom without any preparation. So what we can do as employers, is to really solidify professional development for these educators coming into the field, so it can really mitigate burnout. I feel as if, even if you have the degree, implementation is key. And I feel that oftentimes educators are left to figure things out. And I wonder too, if that also impacts a parent to make the decision to pull their child out of a program. Because let's also talk about the quality of the childcare that is being provided to our most vulnerable children. There's probably about 5 to 10% quality care that's being provided. So it's almost as if we can't overlook that issue to just say, let's provide childcare to all these kids who 0 to 5, but then the quality is being sacrificed because there's not enough investment put into the teachers coming into the field, who maybe at first they're, wide-eyed, ready to, tackle this mission that they're so passionate about, but then they're found to, the first day that they start work, they're put into a classroom without any type of orientation. So I think we can do better in that realm to really look at the quality that we're hoping to provide for these children and for their families.
Thank you. I think Tanika has put a question in the Q&A, which will help us kind of round out the conversation. I'm going to go down the line and ask each of you, in an ideal world, what 3 key items or practices would be a strong push for equality in any work environment? And this will kind of be our wrap up as we close out the conversation today. So Natalicia, I'll start with you. 3 key items and practices.
Well, that's a tough one, but really important. Thank you for that question. You know, as we're talking about, you know, quality jobs, you know, it's something that I wanted to say that we are working. There are many agencies in the OL working on, they call the Good Jobs initiatives, right? To really look at working conditions across the country. Who are the workers, right? Looking at time they have to travel to work, looking at the worker from a holistic perspective. And I think that's a really important initiative. And when we think about, you know, what can we do and what are the 3 things that I would say it's crucial right now for workers, especially women and women of color, is to make sure that the workplace environments are safe. You know, we have a safe, you know, that you have the hybrid model, which I think a lot of companies are adopting right now, understanding the flexibility and need for women to juggle family and work, right? Recognizing that there's high percentage of women across the nation who are actually the sole breadwinner. Recognize the economic contributions that women make to the labor force. And I think those are the key things that I can, you know, initiatives that I can think of at the moment. But most importantly, and I think some of you allude to this already, is this idea of creating a sense of belonging, right? Understanding who you are, what your rights are, and working, you know, in advocating for them as a way to not just, you know, wait for the employer to recognize how important you are, but you telling the employer that they really need you as part of the workforce. So
Thank you, Alicia. Monique, 3 key items or 3 key practices you would like to see.
I'd like to see particularly engagement, inclusion, and power sharing. I'll elaborate. For engagement, I think it's a critical time to listen to one another as workers, and also from workers and employers to really just check in and also have a real check-in as human beings, and also assess what we can do to support one another, whether it be interpersonally or even in the workplace. So that's the engagement is key. I think inclusion, something in the movement that I also like to borrow oftentimes, a quote from the disability rights movement, is nothing about us without us. So decisions that are to be made that impact people, you include them in consultation or even in the decision-making process, so that you don't disproportionately hurt someone by a decision that you make as a person that has power. And lean into power sharing, no matter what stature you hold in the organization or in the atmosphere, that you share power, because that makes it possible for more voices to bolster and make that power more impactful.
Thank you. Jade, 3 items on your wish list to improve the work environment.
Sure. I echo everything that Monique and Natalicia, that's a pretty name, by the way, said. I definitely would say my top 3 would be investment in mental health and well-being of staff, professional development, that's crucial, and equitable pay. Those are my top 3. Those would be my top 3 if you want me to.
That's a good top 3. That's a good top 3. Deanna, your top 3?
So for me, I'd like to see empathy. I'd like to see incentives from the state for childcare workers, and I'd like universal access to leave and I'd speak for men here as well, for parents involved, that is universal across the board for parents to get, that is also acceptable and supported by employers. When I speak about empathy, I quite frankly feel like it's one of the key most important leadership skills that employers or people in leadership should have. I honestly look forward to seeing the concept of us versus me, mine, because us trickles down and up and solves many issues we're currently struggling with in the world. I think about things like if we had empathy, we'd be able to have fair policies at work because everyone cares and empathizes with the other. Issues around climate change, issues around health, equity, and more. And everyone here, please, I would want you to really, if there's something you want to take home the notion of empathy, because empathy enables the entire community to thrive. And of course, continue supporting women, marginalized women, and also advocate for universal childcare.
Diana, Jade, Monique, Natalicia, thank you very much for joining us for this very important International Women's Day conversation. It's been a pleasure to speak with all of you today. And my name is Karen Holmes Ward. I'm going to turn our program back over to Jill and Ellie.
Thank you so much, Karen, and thank you so much to our panelists. Let me just echo Karen's thanks. And a huge thank you to all of our speakers this morning with President Wooten. And thank you to you, Karen. I wish we were in person, but I'm pointing at you and saying thank you for hosting yet again. Also just want to say another big round of applause, virtual round of applause for our panelists, Natalicia, Diana, Jade, Monique. We're so grateful to all of you for sharing your expertise and insights and your personal stories. It's not an easy thing to get up in front of this group and share that. So really appreciate you doing that with us this morning. I also want to say thank you to all of our attendees for joining us for International Women's Day. This is like, a high holiday for many of us, and we're thrilled to have close to 150 people on the line with us today from across New England, lots of different states represented. So as you leave here this morning, we hope you are inspired and full of the IWD spirit. Before I let you go, I want to ask that you put one thing in the chat that you will take away from today's discussion. Let's let our panelists know that we heard them and using this opportunity to inspire each other with our commitments to moving these issues forward, because it's really important. So as you're thinking about that and putting that all in the chat, I'd like to take a moment to thank our supporting partners. Someone, I'm hoping, has just dropped all of that into our program into the link. Oh, and perfect. And Michelle has my slide or this slide up for us. Thank you so much. In the program, you can see all of the supporting partners that have been supporting this event. They're hyperlinked in the program. You can go visit their website and support their amazing work. These are the people and organizations moving women forward in our state and across the country. They need our support, so please consider it. I'd like to also do a special shout out to the planning committee for this event. One of my absolute favorite things about International Women's Day, and this event in particular, is planning with the multi-generation and multi-issue coalition that comprises our committee. And I just think that the courage, camaraderie, and collaboration of this group really embodies the promise of International Women's Day. So a huge shout out to the Boston Area Rape Crisis Center, Boston Education Fund, Cambridge Women's Commission, the Center for Women in Public Policy at UMass Boston, Essex County Commission on the Status of Women, Girls Leap, Massachusetts Commission on the Status of Women, Mass Now, the Mayor's Office for Women's Advancement, Northeastern University, Our Bodies Ourselves, Simmons University, Suffolk County Sheriff's Department, Suffrage 100M Massachusetts, Women's Bureau in the US Department of Labor, and Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. We're also able to offer honorarium to our speakers this year because of generous financial support from Girls Leap and the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. So a special thank you to those particular groups. Again, thank you all so much for joining us today. We're really excited to hopefully see you all again next year, and hopefully we'll be in person again. And that will actually be our 25th anniversary. So we've been doing a lot of reflecting on how long this event's been going on, and all of the amazing groups and women and people who have helped us build this event throughout the years. You saw many of their photos at the starting slideshow, and we're excited to build on that for our 25th anniversary event next year. Happy International Women's Day, everybody. I hope you all have a wonderful day.
I messed up tonight. I lost another fight. I still myself, but I'll just start again. I keep falling down. I keep on hitting the ground. I always get up now to see what's next. Birds don't just fly, they fall down and get up. Nobody learns without getting it wrong. I won't give up, no, I won't give in until I reach the end, and then I'll start again. No, I won't leave. I wanna try everything. I wanna try even though I could fail. I won't give up, no, I won't give in till I reach the end, and then I'll start again. No, I won't leave. I wanna try everything. I wanna try even though I could fail. Try everything. Try everything. Try everything. Look how far you've come. You filled your heart with love. Maybe you've done enough. Take a deep breath. Don't beat yourself up. No need to